My name is Martha Henderson. I'm 34 years old, and Thanksgiving has never felt like a holiday to me. It's always felt like a trial, one where the verdict was decided long before I walked through the door. Thanksgiving is supposed to be about warmth, about gratitude, shared laughter, the soft chaos of family overlapping itself in familiar ways. The kind of thing you see in commercials where everyone looks relaxed and wanted. But for me, Thanksgiving has always felt like stepping into a room where I was tolerated at best, evaluated at worst. Like I needed to prove I deserved a seat at the table every single year. I didn't earn that role by being reckless or cruel. I earned it by being dependable, by being quiet, by doing everything right. Growing up, I was the responsible daughter, the one who followed rules, brought home good grades, stayed out of trouble, and picked up slack when things fell apart. And somehow that made me invisible. My younger sister Marissa was the opposite: loud, emotional, impulsive, magnetic in the way chaos often is. She broke rules, and people rushed to excuse her. I followed them and somehow still disappointed everyone. When we were teenagers, Marissa once took my car without asking and sideswiped a mailbox. By the end of that night, I was grounded for not hiding my keys better. That was the household I grew up in, a place where accountability flowed uphill and blame rolled straight down to me. As an adult, I did what I could to survive it. I moved 3 hours away, built my own consulting firm, created a life that was calm, structured, and most importantly, mine. I kept my circle small, my boundaries quiet, and for the most part, my peace intact. But every November, like clockwork, my phone would buzz. Thanksgiving at our place. Don't be late. Bring dessert. Not an invitation. A directive. A reminder that no matter how far I went, I was still tethered to that family by invisible chains. This year felt different before I even arrived. My mother's message came later than usual. When I offered to bring something other than dessert, she ignored me completely. And that old instinct, the one I'd learned to trust, started stirring again. I sat in my car in their driveway, a store-bought pecan pie balanced on the passenger seat, staring at the front door like it was a courtroom entrance. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and walked inside. The scene hadn't changed. My father grunted a half-hearted hello from the living room eyes, locked on football highlights. My mother buzzed around the kitchen like she was hosting royalty. And Marissa, already wine glass deep, perched on a bar stool, perfect hair, perfect outfit, perfect performance. She smiled at me sideways. Look who finally showed up. Nice to see you too, I said, forcing politeness into my voice. We said 4, my mother chimed in without looking up. It's 3:50, I replied. Well, everyone else was early. And just like that, I was 12 again. I walked toward the dining room and froze. The table was fully set. Plates, silverware, folded napkins, and tucked neatly under every plate, small cream-colored envelopes sealed like wedding invitations. I hesitated, then told myself it was just another one of my mother's performative holiday ideas. Dinner began the usual way: forced smiles, polite conversation. Marissa launched into a rambling story about her latest business opportunity, which sounded suspiciously like dating a wealthy developer twice her age. My parents listened like she was delivering a TED Talk. Then my mother raised her glass. At least one of my children turned out loyal. The room went quiet. Her eyes locked on Marissa. Something inside me didn't crack, it clarified. Because sitting under every plate at that table, quietly waiting, was the truth. And dessert hadn't even been served yet. The clink of my mother's glass lingered in the air, longer than it should have, like a note held just a beat too long. Everyone followed her lead automatically, my father lifting his wine with a shrug, Marissa smiling like she'd just been crowned. I stayed still, my fork hovering above my plate, my heartbeat slow and steady, in a way that surprised me. To loyalty, my mother said again, eyes shining. To the child who never abandoned this family. Marissa accepted it gracefully, dipping her head in a practiced half-bow. Well, she said lightly, someone had to stick around. I finally set my fork down. I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge her. I let the moment stretch because I wanted to see how far they'd go if I didn't stop them. That had always been my mistake, stepping in too early, smoothing things over, absorbing the impact so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. This time I stayed quiet. Dinner resumed, but something had shifted. The polite chatter thinned, replaced by a subtle edge. My mother watched me more closely now, like she was waiting for a reaction I wasn't giving her. My father focused too hard on his food. And Marissa, she leaned into the attention, basking in it. She said, swirling her wine. I've been thinking a lot about responsibility lately. about who really shows up when it matters. My jaw tightened. I mean, Mom and Dad won't be young forever, she continued. Retirement doesn't stretch as far as it used to. Someone has to be prepared. Oh, we're fine, my mother waved her off. We've always managed. That word managed landed like a quiet insult. They'd only managed because I made sure they did. Quietly, consistently, without acknowledgement. Marissa turned to me, then eyebrows lifting in feigned curiosity. So, Martha, how's your little consulting thing going? I smiled, still paying my bills. She laughed soft and dismissive. I just worry. Consulting can be so unstable, no real safety net. My mother nodded immediately. Exactly. You're always chasing clients. Not like real estate, Marissa added, or businesses with tangible assets. There it was, the unspoken accusation, the inheritance. A few years earlier, our grandfather had left me a substantial sum. Not because I asked, but because he trusted me. I never talked about it, never flaunted it, but Marissa had found out, and ever since she'd treated it like a personal offense. I'm not taking financial advice from someone who had their car repossessed twice in 1 year, I said calmly. The table went still. My father coughed into his napkin. Marissa blinked her smile, stretching too wide. Wow, she said lightly. Sensitive much. My mother's lips pressed together. You don't have to be rude just because you feel left out. Left out. I repeated it slowly in my mind. Left out of what I asked. Being praised for loyalty I supposedly don't have. Her tone sharpened. We try to include you, Martha, but you make it hard. You're distant. Cold. Cold. Distant. The words they'd used my whole life to explain why they didn't know me. I stopped expecting basic respect, I said quietly. My father finally looked up. Let's not do this tonight. No, I said, setting my fork down with intention. Let's do it now, because I'm tired of pretending this dinner isn't just a performance. Marissa scoffed. What are you going to bring up the car thing again? Or that ridiculous story about Grandpa's safe? You stole from him, I said, meeting her eyes. Her face went pale. That was never proven. He didn't want to press charges, I replied, but he told me. My mother stood abruptly, gripping the back of her chair. That's enough. No, I said, standing too. You all think I don't see what happens here. How history gets rewritten. How loyalty is rewarded only when it's loud and convenient. You think giving money makes you better than us? My mother snapped. Like you can buy respect. And that was when Marissa reached under her plate. She pulled out the envelope, turning it over like she'd just discovered a foreign object. What's this? My mother frowned. What do you mean? They're under every plate, Marissa said slowly. Did you put these here? I sat back down, my movements unhurried. No, I said, I did. Silence fell, not awkward, not tense. Sterile, like the air before something breaks. No one spoke at first. The refrigerator hummed faintly from the kitchen, a low mechanical sound that suddenly felt too loud, like it was intruding on something private. My mother stared at the envelope in front of her as if it might bite. My father's hands rested flat on the table, unmoving. Marissa was the first to act. She slid a manicured finger under the seal and tore it open. Her expression changed almost immediately. Not shock, not anger, but confusion. The kind that comes when reality doesn't match the story you've been telling yourself. What is this? She asked, pulling out the folded pages. Copies of checks, I said evenly. My mother opened hers next, slower, more cautious. Her brow furrowed as her eyes scanned the numbers. I watched recognition flicker there, followed by something tighter. Fear, maybe. Or guilt she hadn't planned on feeling. That one's from 2 years ago, I said, nodding toward her envelope. When the hospital billed you out of pocket for Dad's rehab, you were $12,800 short. Insurance wouldn't cover the last stretch, remember? My father looked up sharply. That money came from you. Yes. His voice dropped. From your account. I nodded. Marissa laughed once, sharp and brittle. This is ridiculous. Why would you keep this stuff? She flipped through her papers faster now, her jaw clenched when she reached the last page. You paid my lawyer, she said flatly. Your second one, I replied. The first dropped you after you missed 3 meetings. Her face flushed. You never said anything. I wasn't looking for applause. My mother looked up at me, then really looked at me like she was seeing a stranger wearing her daughter's face. Why would you do this? Because you're my family, I said. Or at least I thought you were. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Dense. Sticky. Like the room itself was resisting breath. Then my mother spoke again. You always have to make us feel small, she said quietly. I blinked. What? This, she said, waving the papers. This was never about helping. It was about control. About you being the quiet hero. Something in me shifted something final. I helped because you needed it, I said, my voice low, and I never once asked for credit. But the moment I stopped playing the role you assigned me, you couldn't stand it. Don't twist this, she snapped. You humiliated us. Humiliation requires shame, I replied. And from where I'm sitting, that's in short supply. Marissa stood so fast, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. You think this makes you better than us? You're pathetic. Who hoards old checks just to throw them in our faces? I kept records, I said, standing too, because I knew someday this would happen. Someday you'd erase everything I ever did and rewrite me as the selfish daughter who walked away. My father finally rose slower than the rest of us, his shoulders heavy. We didn't ask you to do any of this. I know, I said. That's what makes it worse. Marissa let out a sharp breath, grabbed her envelope, and ripped it clean in half. The pieces fluttered to the floor. There, she said. Now it never happened. I looked down at the scraps, then back at her. I'm done, I said, reaching for my coat. Oh, don't be dramatic, my mother muttered, but her voice lacked conviction now. I used to think if I just kept giving one day, I'd earn your respect, I said. Turns out all I earned was a front row seat to my own erasure. I walked toward the door. No one followed. No one stopped me. As my hand closed around the doorknob, my mother spoke one last time, barely above a whisper. You'll regret this. I paused, then stepped outside into the cold November air. I didn't regret it. Not yet. But the next morning, that's when the real betrayal came. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up to a silence that felt wrong. Not peaceful, pressurized. Like the city outside my apartment was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. My phone lay face up on the nightstand, still on Do Not Disturb from the night before. I stared at it longer than I want to admit, half expecting a message, an apology, a passive-aggressive olive branch, something like, we didn't like how things went, but you're still family. Anything that would suggest last night had mattered to them the way it had to me. There was nothing. Just work emails, Black Friday promotions, the quiet confirmation of what I already knew. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching strangers line up outside department stores, chasing discounted televisions and small victories. I felt strangely detached from it all, like I'd stepped out of the rhythm everyone else was still moving to. Thanksgiving hadn't just ended a dinner, it had ended a version of my life. I spent the weekend mostly offline. No social media, no work, long walks, old records, and a journal I hadn't opened in months. I wrote without structure, without polish. I wrote down every comment, every sideways look, every moment I'd swallowed frustration to keep the peace. I wasn't trying to heal. I was trying to see clearly. Monday morning hit hard. I was halfway through outlining a client proposal when an email notification popped up from my bank. Notice of scheduled wire transfer approval, $18, $200. Recipient MNR Holdings. My stomach dropped. MNR Holdings wasn't a vendor. It wasn't a client. It wasn't anything I recognized. I logged into my account immediately, hands moving faster than my thoughts, and scanned the transaction history. There it was, a scheduled wire transfer approved and processed. From one of my secondary business accounts, the kind you set up for side projects and forget about because nothing ever touches them. My pulse roared in my ears. I clicked into the details. The sender name was mine, my credentials, my authority. But the email address attached to the approval request was off by one letter in the domain. Close enough to pass at a glance. Close enough to fool an automated system. Close enough to fool me if I hadn't been looking this closely. I called the bank immediately. The representative was calm, professional, sympathetic in the way people are when they know there's very little they can do. She confirmed the transaction time. Friday morning, she said, around 6:40 a.m., the day after Thanksgiving, while I was asleep, while my phone was on Do Not Disturb, while my family was pretending nothing had happened. If the funds haven't been claimed, we might be able to recall them, she said, but we're already past the 24-hour window. I thanked her and hung up my hands, shaking now. I searched my email inbox. Nothing flagged, nothing unusual. Whoever did this knew exactly how to stay invisible. And then it clicked. MNR Holdings. Marissa and Rachel. Rachel, Marissa's former roommate from her early 20s. The one who used to brag about flipping shell companies, dodging taxes, gaming the system. The one Marissa used to joke about building an empire with. This wasn't a hacker. This was family. I called my lawyer. By noon, we'd filed a fraud report. By mid-afternoon, my accounts were frozen, my passwords reset my week, obliterated by phone calls and paperwork. I canceled meetings, missed deadlines. Every minute went into containment. I texted Marissa once, "Do you know what MNR Holdings is?" 6 hours later, she replied, "Never heard of it." No question mark, no concern. Just that same flat detachment she used whenever she was lying. That was the moment something in me collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. Because I realized then that this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a pattern. A slow siphoning that had only come to light because I finally stopped looking away. That night, sitting alone in my dark apartment, surrounded by unopened mail and blinking cursors, I understood something painful and liberating all at once. I had been bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand me a bandage. And I was done. Rock bottom doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like stillness. The days after the fraud report blurred together. I slept in fragments, ate when I remembered to. My apartment grew cluttered in quiet ways, mail stacked by the door, dishes left too long in the sink, the plants on the windowsill slowly wilting. I moved through each day like I was underwater, everything muffled, heavy. The loneliness was the worst part. Not the absence of people. I had colleagues, clients, acquaintances who checked in. It was the absence of safety. The realization that the people who were supposed to be my foundation had been quietly hollowing me out for years. One night, around 3 a.m, I sat on the floor with my laptop open. The glow of spreadsheets and transaction logs lighting the room. Line after line of numbers scrolled past my eyes. Small amounts, larger ones. A pattern emerging where I'd never thought to look before. That was my turning point. Not anger, not tears. Clarity. The next morning, I showered, dressed, and made myself a real breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee in an actual mug. It felt ceremonial, like reclaiming something basic I'd forgotten I was allowed to have. I called my lawyer again. We talked next steps, formal charges, if restitution wasn't made a full audit of every account tied to my name. I hired a forensic accountant to comb through the last 5 years of financial activity. Do you think this was intentional? I asked him during our first call. He didn't hesitate. This was organized. Someone knew what they were doing, and they had access. I already knew who. I tightened everything. 2-factor authentication on every platform. Closed dormant accounts. Replaced my laptop and phone. It wasn't paranoia, it was housekeeping. And then slowly I started to rebuild something else. There was a coffee shop downstairs I'd been avoiding out of habit, too crowded, too loud. One afternoon, I wandered in without thinking. The barista Daniel smiled when I ordered the kind of easy, unforced warmth that felt almost foreign. "You look like you could use an extra shot," he said lightly. He wasn't wrong. We started talking in small increments, a comment here, a joke there. No pressure, no expectations. When he asked how my day was, he actually listened to the answer. We started walking together in the evenings, just loops around the park near my building. No big confessions, no trauma dumping, just 2 people existing side by side, letting silence be comfortable. It felt safe. 3 weeks later, the forensic report came back. There hadn't just been one fraudulent transfer. There had been dozens, smaller amounts over the last 2 years. Routed through sub-accounts I'd created for side projects and forgotten to close, each accessed using credentials from an old family laptop I'd lent Marissa when she was job hunting. They hadn't taken from me once. They'd been siphoning me slowly. I felt sick reading it, but I didn't break. Because somewhere between the first betrayal and this confirmation, I'd stopped seeing myself as a victim. I was someone who built systems, who solved problems, who didn't panic under pressure. And now I had a problem that finally belonged to me. I wasn't looking for revenge, but I was done being erased. There's a moment after clarity settles where emotion stops driving and strategy takes over. That's where I found myself 2 weeks after the forensic report landed in my inbox. I wasn't spiraling anymore. I wasn't pacing my apartment replaying conversations or imagining confrontations that would never bring closure. I was sitting at my desk, hair still damp from the shower, a mug of strong coffee in my hand, staring at a spreadsheet I'd titled Operation Clean Sweep. It wasn't dramatic, it was necessary. I called my attorney Raj again. He'd been with me since the early days of my consulting firm, back when my biggest worry was whether a client would pay on time. Now his tone was different, sharper, more deliberate. "This isn't just theft," he said, after reviewing the expanded report. "It's identity, impersonation, wire fraud, and abuse of digital credentials. If you want to go to court, this is airtight." I leaned back in my chair. What if I don't want court yet? There was a pause on the line. "You want leverage," he said carefully. "I want effectiveness," I replied. "Court can come later. Right now, I want them to understand exactly what they've done and who they did it to." Raj exhaled. "Then we build quietly. We document everything. And when you're ready, we drop it all at once." That was the plan. I spent the next week doing two things, tightening my world and widening theirs. First, I locked everything down. Every account, every login, every cloud service, biometric access where possible, new hardware, new digital footprints. I closed accounts I'd forgotten existed and audited permissions I'd never revisited. It felt like cleaning out a house after a break-in, painful but oddly empowering. Then came the widening. I started pulling public records, business filings, loan applications, licensing databases. You'd be surprised how much information people leave lying around when they assume no one is looking. Marissa had tried to secure a business loan recently using inflated income statements and vague projections. Red flags everywhere. And my parents weren't as insulated as they liked to believe. A private loan they'd taken out during the pandemic had quietly defaulted, one they'd covered using funds that traced back inevitably to me. The deeper I dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't desperation, it was entitlement. Then, like nothing had happened, my phone buzzed. A group text from my mother. Christmas at ours, same as always, 6 p.m. sharp. Looking forward to a peaceful night with family. I stared at the screen for a long time. Peaceful. After everything, the theft, the lies, the silence, they were still pretending this was just another holiday. That if they didn't acknowledge the damage, it didn't exist. I typed back one word. Okay. I wasn't going to Christmas to reconcile. I was going to present. I called my Uncle Greg that night, my mother's older brother, the family's former black sheep until he cleaned up his life and built something solid for himself. We'd always had a quiet understanding, two people pushed to the edges for refusing to play along. I told him everything. When I finished, there was a long pause. I always knew Marissa was trouble, he said finally. I'll be there. He wasn't coming to intervene, he was coming to witness. I asked my assistant to help me compile a short, clean slide deck, just facts. Timelines, amounts, names. Nothing emotional. Truth doesn't need decoration. By the time Christmas week arrived, I wasn't anxious. I was ready. The first sign that my quiet pressure was working came faster than I expected. 24 hours after the anonymous email went out, Rachel vanished digitally at least. Her LinkedIn profile went private. Her Instagram was wiped clean. The half-finished website advertising her consulting services returned a dead link. People don't scrub their online presence like that unless they're scared of something specific. Good. Marissa reacted differently, louder, sloppier. 2 days after my message reached Rachel, Marissa posted a now-deleted story ranting about fake people sabotaging real dreams. No names, no details, just enough venom to tell me the seed had landed exactly where I wanted it. She was rattled. Then the investor situation began to unravel. One by one, meetings were postponed. Calls went unanswered. I didn't push. I didn't follow up. I let doubt do its quiet work. All I'd done was suggest someone check the state licensing board. The truth did the rest. Still, my family played their favorite game, pretend nothing was wrong. My mother sent recipe suggestions. My father forwarded a football schedule. No mention of Thanksgiving. No mention of the fraud. Silence packaged as normalcy. Then, 3 days before Christmas, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a framed photograph. Marissa and me at the beach 10 years earlier. Sunburned and smiling in a moment that had once felt uncomplicated. On the back, written in thick black marker, "You were always jealous. Merry Christmas." I recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clever. It was a threat disguised as nostalgia. And it told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't scared enough yet. And she thought this was still a game. I set the frame down carefully like evidence and felt something in my chest harden, not into anger, but into resolve. That night, I laid everything out on my dining table. Printed transaction logs, bank statements, business filings, screenshots of access records tied to the old family laptop, demand letters from my attorney, originals not copies. I wasn't bringing Christmas gifts. I was bringing truth. On Christmas Eve, I rehearsed what I'd say not out loud, but in the mirror, in the quiet moments before sleep. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to accuse. I was going to present, then leave. No debate, no bargaining, no waiting for remorse that would never come. When Christmas morning arrived, I dressed with intention. Black slacks, a gray cashmere sweater, a long wool coat, clean, composed, professional. I tucked the folders and a small USB drive into a leather portfolio and stepped outside into the cold. The drive to my parents' house was silent, but inside me there was fire, not rage, not grief. Purpose. They'd taken my money. They'd taken my trust. They'd tried to take my place in the family. Tonight, I was taking something back. Control. I rang the doorbell at 6:02 p.m. Behind the door, I heard my mother's voice, bright rehearsed. Coming. When she opened it, she smiled like nothing had happened. Like Thanksgiving hadn't detonated our family. Like money hadn't been stolen. Like silence hadn't been weaponized. Martha, she said warmly, you came. Oh, I came, I replied just as pleasantly. I stepped inside. The house was dressed in artificial cheer. Candles flickered on the mantel. Bing Crosby hummed softly through the speakers. Cinnamon cookies cooled on the counter. It looked like a holiday card if you ignored the rot beneath it. My father approached first, clapping a hand on my shoulder with forced enthusiasm. Glad you made it. Me too, I said, and meant something very different than he did. Marissa appeared moments later, gliding into the room in a deep red dress, diamonds at her ears that I doubted she actually owned. She paused when she saw the leather portfolio under my arm. Her smile faltered just slightly. Well, she said, recovering quickly, didn't think you'd show after your little Thanksgiving tantrum. I ignored her. My Uncle Greg arrived a few minutes later, meeting my eyes with a subtle nod before taking a seat in the corner, quiet and solid, exactly where we'd planned. Dinner was served. Turkey, mashed potatoes, overly sweet yams, laid out like a Norman Rockwell fantasy. Everyone took their seats. My mother lifted her glass. To family, she said, and a peaceful Christmas. That was my cue. I stood. Before we toast, I said calmly, I'd like to say something. Every head turned toward me. I won't take long, I continued, but I do want to clear up a few things. My mother's smile tightened. Martha, maybe this isn't the time. No, I said gently, this is exactly the time. I opened my portfolio and pulled out 4 folders, placing them one by one in front of each person at the table. Mom, Dad, Marissa, and 1 extra for Greg. Extra. What is this? Marissa demanded, already flipping hers open. A summary, I said, of every unauthorized transaction made using my business accounts over the last 3 years. Every wire, every login, every shell company. Her face drained of color. This is insane, she snapped. You're accusing me of stealing from you. I'm not accusing, I replied evenly. I'm proving. My mother opened her folder. Her hands began to shake. These are bank records, she whispered. Verified by my forensic accountant, I said. Reviewed by my attorney. My father stared at his papers, blinking like the words refused to settle. Marissa slammed her folder shut. You always acted like that money was a gift. Did I give you permission to forge my digital signature? I asked quietly. Did I authorize you to impersonate me? Uncle Greg spoke from the corner. I watched her compile all of this. It's real. Marissa turned on him. You don't know what you're talking about. I know fraud when I see it, he said calmly. I pulled out the final document and placed it on the table. This is a formal demand letter, I said. You have 10 business days to return the stolen funds, $162, 846 guys, or we proceed with criminal charges. The report has already been filed. My mother's voice trembled. You wouldn't. I already have, I said. This is your sister, she pleaded. Your family. Family doesn't steal, I replied. Family doesn't gaslight. And family doesn't send anonymous threats. Marissa flinched. I traced the handwriting, I continued. You're sloppy when you panic. The room collapsed inward. I looked at them one last time. I didn't break this family, I said. I just stopped lying for it. Then I turned and walked out. This time I didn't hesitate at the door. The fallout didn't come with fireworks or screaming phone calls. It came quietly, the way consequences usually do, when there's nowhere left to hide. By New Year's, my lawyer called to confirm the funds had been returned in full. A certified check. No note. No explanation. Just the money, every last dollar cleared and accounted for. They'd chosen the private route. Smart. Criminal charges would have cost them far more than pride. Marissa disappeared almost completely after that. Her social media accounts were deactivated. The wellness boutique she'd been boasting about quietly dissolved when investors backed out. Rachel, according to a mutual acquaintance, left the state altogether. No forwarding address. No goodbye. My parents didn't call. Not in January. Not in February. Then in March, a single envelope arrived in my mailbox. Typed. Plain. From my mother. We didn't know. We should have. We were wrong. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally see you. I read it once. Then I folded it and placed it in the same drawer as the rest of the documents, not as a trophy, not as leverage. Just a record. Proof that the truth had landed, even if it arrived too late to change anything. My life didn't magically transform overnight. Healing doesn't work like that, but it did become quieter, lighter. I stopped bracing for impact in conversations. I stopped explaining myself. Daniel stayed. The walks became dinners. The dinners became something steadier, built on curiosity instead of control. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking to fit into someone else's version of me. I thought back often to that Thanksgiving toast to the child who stayed loyal, and I finally understood how wrong it had been. Loyalty isn't silence. Loyalty isn't self-erasure, and it certainly isn't bleeding quietly so others can feel comfortable. I didn't leave my family. I left the lie. And the final toast, the only one that mattered, belonged to me. To the woman who told the truth,